So this video, we're trying to make a graph of a single set of data, and you can see that. So let's say you're doing a physics problem and your teacher says, okay, I claim that the omega, which is angular velocity, is equal to some initial term plus a constant times time squared. For whatever reason, let's say this is some weird model that you've heard of, and the physicist wants you to check. So you did an experiment and you acquired all this data. Great. So you did a lab and you found all this information. How can we analyze this with a graph? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this column, then press and hold Control and highlight this one. Or if they're sitting right next to each other, you can highlight them just like this. If they're not just right next to each other and you can't figure out how to do this because maybe you're on a Mac and it works a little differently, one thing you could do is just make copies of the data and put them right next to each other, right? Anyways, so let's say you have the data and we highlighted it and we're going to insert a graph here. So I'm going to hit insert, insert, and I'll do a scatter plot. Again, do not hit the line plot. So to be clear, let me do that one last time. I'm going to insert. Do not use the line plot. That is bad. We have different increment sizes than one. So I'm going to use the scatter plot. Always use a scatter plot. Okay, so there's that. And so now that I've got this, I could go through the same formatting that I showed perhaps on another video, and I'm going to do that just in case you watch these videos in a different order. One thing you could do is if you've already created a template, you could right click, change the chart type, and if you've created a template already, you could use one of these templates that you've used. And so notice this would speed up your formatting a lot. Now I'm actually going to undo that and just show you how to create this. Whoops, come on. There we go. So let's see how you could quickly make this data set. So in this case, the first thing I see is I might need some axis titles. Now, a legend, notice there's no legend on here. We do not want a legend because there's only one data set. It's obvious what we're plotting. You could even argue you don't need a title in this case because the axis labels will make it quite clear. So depending on the situation, you may or may not want a title. If you're making multiple graphs like this and each one corresponded to a different situation, include a title. For example, you could say omega versus time for trial 1, omega versus time for trial 2, etc. All right, so in this case, how do I get this axis title? I need to do on the vertical axis, that's going to be the y coordinate. So that's actually omega. So now I'm going to type W, and I'll type that, and that's in radians per second. Notice I type in the whole thing. Oh, I'm going to, before I forget, one of the first things I like to do is change both the font. Okay, come on now. I'm going to change the font to Times New Roman. That's what my favorite font is. And maybe you could change the font size. If you're doing a presentation, you better do 18 point. If you're doing a paper, maybe you do 10 or 11. Let's just do 14 for fun today. So now I've got this. And remember, the units are not italicized. So they're done. Now I go back and I'm going to hit Control I, and I need to change that to the symbol font, which will give me the Greek letter omega. So I click there and type SYM. All right. Now the horizontal axis is T in seconds. Now, when you look at this, I think you'll agree it's not very clear what the axes are, etc. So this is one of the reasons you want to make your axes stand out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on this axis and go over here and mess around up on these buttons. If I click on the paint bucket, I can change the line color to black. Immediately, that makes this graph more clear. I could do the same thing with the vertical axis. All right. Now I'm going to click on the grid lines. These are two in my face. I want to get that a little bit more in the background. So if you're going to use grid lines, they can be useful. Don't get me wrong, but I want to get them more subtle. So I'm going to click on them and reduce the line size here and also the dash, make them dashed. And notice these grid lines are less in your face. Whoops, I already have the color gray. So they're lighter color, they're dashed, and they're lighter weight. And now you can still use them, but they're way in the background, so it's easier to see. If I need to change the sig figs of these numbers, I could click on a number, and then there's so much stuff over here. This gives me the colors and such. Over here it lets me adjust the numbers. I could pick the numbers like this, or I could change the number of sig figs here. I could make this say 3 sig figs. Maybe 2 is fine for this one, but if you needed to know how to change the sig figs, you could do that. On this vertical axis, maybe that's too much. Maybe I only want 1 sig fig. You're never going to read a plot to 4 sig figs. You're lucky to get 3. So usually 2 is reliable, third is a guess, which is a good thing to guess, but don't count on it. Now I'm going to change the axis options as well. Notice this one here, there's no need to go all the way down to, actually the vertical axis looks pretty good. But the horizontal axis, there's no need to go out to 4. So I'm going to click on this. You can click here, and I could change this just to go out to 3. And now maybe I don't like that increment size. I kind of like going by 1 second. And if you want, you could even change this, and you could add in a half-second interval if you like that. Then you could right-click and select Add the minor grid lines. You might need to do some formatting. So we could lower that down and make it a dash. And the idea is now you could see every half second, but there aren't so many labels. You could do the same thing on this vertical axis since there's so many labels, but that's good. Yeah, let's do it just so it looks good. So in this case, let's say we go by 10, and the minor unit, let's say we go by 5, and then let's add the minor grid lines. So right click, add minor grid lines, and let's format that down a little bit. So let's make it smaller and lighter. So now you can see, yeah, you can change the gray color to whatever you need to do. Anyways, all right, let's leave it at that. And so you could mess with the grid lines if you wanted more. Now, how do we add a trend line? Okay, so in this equation, I could right click and I could add a trend line. Now, according to the claim, just reminding you how I started this video, there was a claim from your teacher that it should be omega naught times k times time squared. If I want to see that, I look at the trend lines and try and pick the trend line that matches. Logarithmic shouldn't match that. Oh, whoops, let me click on this trend line. Polynomial of order 2 should match that. Okay, so if I then want to understand this thing, right, what good does it do to put a trend line on if I don't display it on the chart? Now, I just want to point out that this trend line actually looks a lot different. Just so it pops, let's fill it white. There we go. That way we can see it better. All right. And so maybe we could even color code this to make it match. And maybe you can color code this one here. That way all the stuff that relates to the trend line is in red right now. So in this case, I would say the claim is not very well supported. Yeah, and if you see why, I used a linear fit for this data. So yeah, according to this, there should be a large linear term. So in this case, let's say I wanted to do a different let's say I wanted to do a different type of fit here. We could go back and try an exponential, right? Let's see. Oh, it's not even letting me do an exponential. Okay, I hadn't thought that through. All right. Let's go ahead and leave this for now and just call that good. But the idea is this is how you could check those different types of curve fits. And remember, you want your trend line to match your claim equation, right? If you think an equation should be linear, you should do a linear fit. If you think it should be exponential, you should do an exponential fit, etc. Let's call that good.